But a resident came up to me the other day as he was walking through the dining room and said, "You know what? This young man reminds me a lot of you." And that is a compliment that I will take. I was definitely not as sharp and savvy as he was at his age now. So without further ado, the man, the myth, the legend, Michael McGerty.
Okay, I'll just, everyone on this side, I'll just vicariously shake all of your hands in spirit.
I'm going to vicariously go to your backside again. Okay. And there we go. Okay.
Okay, are we good? All right, sounds great. All right, Mark, are we ready to roll?
Yeah. Rock and roll.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you once more for coming, especially all of you who were here during my, yep, it's working just fine. Especially all of you who were here during my last program. This time I've got a clicker so I can click the slides, so that's definitely a bonus. Now, could we do just a quick show of hands who was here at my last talk? Oh, wow, lots of people. Well, I suppose that's good, yeah. So today we're going to go into China. Now, China's just a fascinating, fascinating place. I just got back from there a few weeks ago. All right, now, I believe we are just about ready to get started, so let's go. Welcome to China. Actually, I was feeling very welcome indeed after our 13-hour flight to get here. But despite being up for almost 24 hours straight, I was feeling pretty excited. We were on the ground in China. Now, the first thing you notice about China is the scale. Seriously, that country is just huge. The total distance we covered in our trip was something like 20,000 miles over 2 weeks. The population's huge, too. 1.2 billion people live there. To put that in perspective, well, Beijing has something like 22 million by itself. Now, our good old hometown of Chicago is America's third largest city with a healthy population of 3 million. It's really hard just to appreciate the magnitude of everything until you're actually standing there on the ground in the world's largest country. I really like clicking this. It's like magic. Here we are now with a nice little graphic I have for our trip to China. The picture shows all the cities that we visited during our trip. Now, these two big empty areas that you can see up here are essentially desert, and not that many people live there. So we really got to see almost all of China. The north of China, up there, tends to be the more historical and industrial area, and also kind of the political power center of China. Now the south, down here, tends to be more agricultural and naturey. Now, the first three cities we visited up north were Beijing, Datong, and Xi'an. Now, I want to go really in-depth on Beijing, and then we'll do a more cursory overview of the rest of the cities on this map. Beijing is the modern capital of China, and it's one of the largest cities in the entire world. They got some really great history there. Now, Datong, over to the left, is a little more off the beaten path. No one's really ever heard of it, but it's a major center for Buddhism. Now, Xi'an, down there, was the ancient capital of China before Beijing, and you can see a really great lot of history in Xi'an as well. I'll talk more about the south when we get down there. Here's me in Tiananmen Square. Tiananmen Square is an icon of China, and actually the largest public square in the world. Allegedly, up to 1 million people can fit in here all at once. It really is just huge. This is where we walked the first night after we got to our hotel. Now here, this giant pillar you can see is the monument to the people's heroes over there on the left. Now this is essentially a giant concrete slab dedicated to those who died in the communist revolution in China. Now that large building you can see there behind me is actually the Mausoleum of Chairman Mao. It's a rather strange-looking building where Chairman Mao, the very famous chairman, is actually, his body is on display inside, which is a little weird. More than what's on the square, though, people know the square because of what happened here, the Tiananmen Square protests. It was here in 1989 that the Chinese government suppressed the protesters and put a permanent stop to the democracy movement in China. Now, quick check before we move on. Can everyone hear me okay? Is it all good with the sound? All right, I think we did a good job then. Here's me, bright and early, in front of the National People's Congress. Now, since China is ruled absolutely by the Communist Party, it seems weird that they would need a Congress. But it's not exactly our idea of a Congress. Representatives are appointed rather than elected. Is that me? Okay, there we go. Oh. All right, we'll just move on. So anyway, it's not exactly our idea of a Congress. Representatives are appointed rather than elected, and their only real job is just to rubber stamp the decisions made by the party leaders. So it's essentially the Chinese version of Capitol Hill. But unlike Capitol Hill, there are a ton of people from all the different provinces in China, and they don't really do anything. Here's me now inside the Grand Assembly Hall at the very center of the National People's Congress. Now it's just a huge room. It seats thousands of representatives. But I thought it was really cool to be able to get in here, inside the real Congress of China. I have to admit, though, that I have been in the Chinese Congress, but not the American one. Here's me and my dad now, in front of the Forbidden City. Now, the Forbidden City is very famous. A lot of you have probably heard that name before. It's very famous because it was actually the home of the emperors of China for 500 years. Now, the Forbidden City is right next to Tiananmen Square, so together they kind of form a bridge between the ancient and modern. It's not just important because of the emperors that lived here, though. It was actually right up there from that balcony that Chairman Mao proclaimed the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949. That's why his giant portrait hangs there above the entrance. This has been the power center in China for 500 years, and it still is today. Here's me now inside the grand outer court of the Forbidden City. It was built for use by the emperors, and it was definitely built on an imperial scale. It's just giant. Now that big building that you can see behind me is actually the Hall of Supreme Harmony, the biggest and most important hall in the Forbidden City, and the home of the grand throne of the Emperor of China. I think this is a good opportunity to play one of my all-time favorite picture games called Guess Which One Is Me? It's like Where's Waldo, except much easier.
Orange shirt.
I'll give you guys a hint. It's the blonde one. This one shouldn't be too hard to guess either. Here's me in front of the throne of the Chinese emperor. Now, unfortunately, it's pretty hard to see, but you can definitely see how popular it is. I mean, there's just a huge crowd in front of there. Now, believe it or not, in China, people actually do not form lines, ever. There's always just a mad rush to get wherever you're going. And friendly-looking elderly Chinese ladies will not hesitate to shove you out of the way in order to get a spot. It really is crazy, and that took a little getting used to. Here is a close-up picture of the throne of the Emperor of China. Now, this featured prominently in the movie The Last Emperor, which is actually about the last emperor of China. Now, what I think is cool about the movie is that it was actually filmed on site in the Forbidden City, using the real historical places. But you can definitely tell from this picture that the throne is pretty cool. I mean, you need steps just to even get up there. I like this picture because it gives you just a little bit of an idea of how huge the Forbidden City is. Now, it's called the Forbidden City because it's a huge complex of buildings for use by the emperors, like a miniature city. And at one point in history, entry was forbidden to common people. So really, it is just gigantic. All these buildings with yellow roofs are a part of it, and they basically extend in every direction, just about as far as the eye can see. It's just crazy. Now, something you may also notice over the last few pictures is that I don't exactly blend in with the crowd in China. Now, in China, Westerners are pretty rare, blonde hair is practically non-existent, and teenage tourists are impossible to find. So if you're a young, blonde foreigner, then people take notice. You actually get quite a bit of attention. Here's me with a Chinese woman who actually asked if she could take her picture with me. Now, it was kind of funny, actually. People would just come up out of nowhere and ask to take pictures with me. They always asked first, and they were very polite about it. And then, of course, while we were talking, some of them would ask if I dyed my hair. Now, this was really just crazy. Groups of people would just come up, take all their pictures with me, and then be gone, like, really fast. It was very unusual. Now that took getting used to. Here's me with another guy who wanted his picture, only 5 minutes later outside the Forbidden City. Now, at this point, I still hadn't figured out why, so I was completely confused when this kept happening all day. When I finally figured it out, though, it made a lot more sense. And, I have to admit, I actually started to enjoy it. Here's me now on top of Jingshan Hill, looking out over the Forbidden City. Now, not a whole lot of tourists come here, but I really like the great views you get over Beijing. From here, you can really get an idea of just how huge the Forbidden City is. Now, I know I've been saying that a lot, but this picture literally doesn't even capture the whole thing. It goes off the ends on both sides of the picture, and all of those buildings there are a part of it. If we could see far enough, Tiananmen Square is actually all the way on the opposite side from us. Now, something else you may notice about this picture is that it kind of fades off into the distance, like fog. It's actually not fog, it's smog. Now, China is a country of new industry, so Beijing is one of the most polluted cities on Earth. You can't even see the sky in most of China. You can barely see down the street. Navigating through air pollution was definitely one of the skills we had to learn on the ground in China. Here's me with another very important Beijing historical site, the Temple of Heaven. Now, I think it really looks cool. I like all the concentric circles and the proportion of all the different parts. It's important, though, because this was the holiest spot in ancient Beijing. The emperors would come here in order to make sacrifices for a good harvest. Now, it was a big tradition in China for the emperors to make sacrifices to heaven. Symbolically, their power to rule came from the mandate of heaven, so they definitely wanted to maintain that relationship. Now, unfortunately, this building didn't exactly preserve well over the ages. Surprisingly, buildings with giant metal studs on the roof, like this one, tend to be struck by lightning and subsequently burned down. But after it happened to this building, they rebuilt it on the exact same spot with the exact same design, so I suppose I'm okay with it. Alright, now this building has a bright yellow roof. We haven't seen a building with a bright yellow roof before. Can anyone guess what makes that significant? I'm just kidding. It's a souvenir shop. Here's me now in Tiananmen Square. We actually went to Tiananmen Square one more time before we left Beijing. I wanted to come back in order to see the flag lowering ceremony. Now, that up there is their national flag, and it's raised every day at dawn and lowered every day at dusk. On a side note, you can actually see the National People's Congress back there. Now, the elite Chinese flag guard marches out of the Forbidden City every night, takes down the flag, and then marches back in. It's actually quite a spectacle, and tons of people gather to watch. So that means more shoving. Here you can see the elite Chinese flag guard taking down the red Chinese flag at sundown. One of the interesting things they do is that they actually tie it into a knot as they take it down. This is as opposed to the traditional folding method used by most countries, including the US. It just goes to show that China has its own unique identity, and they want to maintain that, even today. Now, from what I'd read, I was under the impression that Tiananmen Square was open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to anyone who wanted to go. I was wrong. I was very wrong. Now, as soon as we finished watching the flag lowering ceremony, they actually lit up all the buildings like this, with what looked like Christmas lights. It was actually a pretty cool display. But immediately afterwards, Chinese soldiers start to kick everyone off the square, including us. The whole square, filled with thousands of people, is emptied within minutes. Now, we were some of the last people to figure this out, though, so we ended up getting the honor of being personally shooed off Tiananmen Square by a People's Liberation Army soldier. That was pretty scary, and it's definitely one of the experiences I remember most vividly from China. Even if you don't see it right away, I'm willing to bet that you all know this image. The Chinese people are just amazing engineers and architects, and this is their single greatest accomplishment. In a nation with a history of building on a grand scale, this is the monument built on the grandest scale of all. This is the Great Wall of China. Now, the Great Wall is just an incredible, incredible place. I'm quite the Great Wall enthusiast. Now, just for some background, no one actually knows how long it is. It's anywhere between 5,000 and 15,000 miles in total. It's just unbelievable. Now, something I think is interesting is that even though the Great Wall started thousands of years ago, during the reign of the first Chinese emperor, most of the wall that you can see today was actually built around 500 years ago during the Ming Dynasty. Now, they're the same guys who built the Forbidden City. The wall was built to seal off China's northern frontier and to protect it from all the northern barbarians, like the Mongols, who you obviously didn't want running around your country. Now, it was almost completely failed in its original purpose to keep out invaders, and invaders kept attacking China throughout its history. But the builders still left behind an iconic symbol of Chinese culture. I really like this picture, especially the ruined tower up there. Now, since we knew that the Great Wall would be so important, we wanted to spend as much time as we possibly could there. I wanted to actually hike on the wall. So we ended up actually hiking the wall for an entire day, just as far as we could go. Now, you may also notice that this isn't exactly the familiar image of the Great Wall that most people think of. That's because we're hiking on unrestored wall. That means wall that was never reconstructed for tourists. That also means that these are the original stones of the Great Wall that we're hiking on, the real ruins. That was a pretty amazing experience. I really liked being up there next to the real ruins of the Great Wall. That was a very memorable experience. Here you can see another great picture of the Great Wall. Now, you can see it actually snaking off into the distance over the tops of the hills here. This was actually the farthest that we could see all day, and that's because on the day when we decided to climb the Great Wall, it was foggy and raining. Even though that reduced our visibility to about 0, though, I think it made it even more incredible. imagine feeling the soft raindrops on your face, the smooth stones of the ancient wall beneath your feet. It was quite a memorable experience. Here's me in front of another ruined section of wall. Now, some of the sections of wall are more intact than others, and this one you can see is not in great shape. Now, since this isn't a primary tourist site, there isn't really a beaten path, and at some points we literally had to climb up the Great Wall in order to keep going. Now, you may also notice that in this picture I am wearing a fairly ridiculous hat. My dad colloquially refers to it as the pom-pom hat because of the giant ball of fluff on top. I don't know if you can see, but it actually says Red Wings on the top of the hat. That's for my school mascot, the Bennett Academy Red Wings. I figured I'd wear it on the Great Wall to show some school spirit. Oh, I really like this hat. Maybe I'll wear it for a little while. Here is me on the restored Great Wall of China. Now, we hiked the Great Wall for an entire day. So by the end, we'd actually made it back to civilization and back to a part of the Great Wall that was reconstructed, rebuilt for tourists in the modern times. This is the image of the Great Wall that most people are used to seeing, and it looks pretty cool. Here you can see a very steep section of the Great Wall behind me. It plunges down into the valley here and then comes back up on the other side. Now, for defensive purposes, the Great Wall actually takes the hardest route between two hills, always. That makes it good for keeping out invaders, but it makes it just a bit of a challenge to climb. Here is me in front of an awesome, imposing, restored tower on the wall. Now, these were bases for the soldiers that patrolled up and down the wall during the ancient times. Now, they would actually go up and down from these towers, and these towers used to be every few hundred feet for the entire length of the wall. Considering how big they are and how big the wall is, that's pretty impressive. And then we had to say goodbye to the Great Wall. I still miss it. Here you could see me touching it. I'm making sure that I could get to know this amazing place as much as I can before we leave. And I'm also taking advantage of the unique opportunity to touch history. Now, the route that I picked along the Great Wall was perfect. There was only one hitch. That hitch was that there was actually a military base situated right next to the Great Wall that was along our route. That means we actually had to get off the wall, hike completely around this military base, and then get back on the other side. Here you can see me in the middle of the Chinese jungle. It was quite an adventure. We basically had no idea where we were or where we were going. And we fought through the Chinese jungle for 2 hours, completely soaked to the bone, getting scratched by all the branches and bushes, right in the middle of Chinese nowhere. I still think it was pretty awesome, though. It's not every day that you get to go wandering in the Chinese wilderness. Now, while we were making our way down the mountain, and after we got down into the valley, we encountered all sorts of these little local Chinese villages. Now, the people who lived here were real villagers. They farmed what they could off the land, and they lived out here in the woods, completely isolated from the rest of society. We passed this little thatched house in the woods while we were walking. Now, I thought it was a very unique experience as a traveler to be able to see this, the real villages. I mean, these people are living in some ways like people have for thousands of years. I think that was a very unique and very real Chinese experience. Like I said, they were farmers, and here you can see us hiking down through their terraced fields in the mountains. They were built right into the hillside, and they kind of blended in, so it was really hard to see until you were right on top of one. here's me with one of the walled Chinese villages that we actually ran into while we were hiking. Now, it would have been all great, except that our local Chinese guide, Gary, was completely and utterly lost, and so were we. We had no idea where we were. We were in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, so we actually ended up having to stop and ask some of these villagers for directions. Now, that was a little scary, since some of them had these very aggressive dogs that were guarding the entrances to the village, like the one that you see up there. But the villagers were very friendly to us, and they pointed us on in the right direction. Yeah, that's cool. Now, after that, we flew to Datong, the second city that we're going to talk about today. Now, it was a few hundred miles away, and Datong, like I said, is a major center for the religion of Buddhism. There were 3 major sites in Datong that we wanted to see that were related to Buddhism. Here you can see a picture of the first one, the Hanging Temple. It's called the Hanging Temple because it's built up here on the side of the cliff, hundreds of feet above the ground. What I think is really cool is how this place is possible. In the ancient times, people actually drilled holes down into the side of the mountain, and then they inserted these vertical wooden pylons down into the holes in order to support these buildings. But the temple is unique for another reason as well. It's the only place in China to be home to all 3 major religions. Now, those big 3 are Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. What's a little bit odd about them, and what kind of offends Western sensibilities, is that they're not mutually exclusive. You can believe in one if you want, or you can believe in all 3. The Chinese believe that truth is not just found in one place, and that belief is embodied in the Hanging Temple. Here's me now inside the Hanging Temple. Down to my right is the tiny wooden railing that separates you from a short drop to not being in the Hanging Temple anymore. Over to the left, next to my head, you can see the narrow, windy staircase that we use to get around to the different buildings. And right there in the center are those very rickety-looking wooden pylons that hold the whole temple suspended over the void. Here's me and my dad with the second Buddhism site that we wanted to see in Datong, the Yingshan Wooden Pagoda. Now, Buddhism is a really big part of Chinese culture, and these pagodas are everywhere. Now, essentially, they're these giant towers that were built all over China in the ancient times in order to house relics of the Buddha, the founder of Buddhism. They're actually some of the oldest buildings in China. Now, this particular one is the oldest wooden building anywhere in the country, which I thought was pretty cool. It's really crazy to be up next to a building that's this old, and something about it really set off my sense of adventure. That's cool. Here you can see a picture up the side of the pagoda. Now, it's really crazy to be inside a building that's this ancient. You can go in, only the bottom floor, but you can go in, and it's dark and atmospheric, and the whole place just oozes with ancient mystery. It's actually a little creepy. Now, all of those tiny little black specks that you could see around the top of the pagoda are actually hundreds and hundreds of black birds just circling around the pagoda 24/7. They're just always up there circling. That kind of adds just a little bit to the creepy atmosphere of the place. Here's me now with the third Buddhist site that we wanted to see in Datong, the Yungan Grottos. Now, it's called the Yungan Grottos because of these grottos, or caves, that are literally dug into the side of the cliff here. Each one of those caves is filled with these just giant statues of Buddha and his followers, and every surface inside is carved. It's really stunning. Now, in the ancient times, people carved these statues in order to accumulate merit, which in Buddhism is supposed to help you escape suffering. Now, you can see the entrance to a larger one of these caves here right next to my head. Here we are now with my favorite statue at the grottos. You can see him from out here because his cave actually collapsed centuries ago, which is when a lot of his friends got destroyed. It's really crazy to be up next to a statue that's this big. If we could actually zoom in, too, we would see just hundreds and hundreds of tiny little Buddha figures all on the rocks around him. Just every rock face is carved, every surface inside the cave. But as amazing as he is, imagine something like him in every single cave in the Yongan Grottos. Whew, gets hot in there. All right. Now, I consider myself a fairly adventurous traveler. So when we got back to Detong, I wanted to go out and explore the city. So we did. We decided, hey, let's go out and wander through China. We're here anyway. So we went out and we started walking. We walked through construction sites and these neighborhoods with old and rundown buildings, and some places where we probably shouldn't have gone from a safety standpoint. There are some places where we really got some odd looks for being tourists. We were definitely off the beaten path. This was real China, not tourist China. Now again, as a traveler, I thought it was very unique and pretty cool to be able to go out in that real China and see the real people in the real city. But real China can also be a little bit scary at times. One of the things that you actually notice while you're just walking the streets in China is that tons of people have these little electric bikes that they use to get around. Now, you may have heard about that. That's pretty famous, that they have these, the government discourages cars because of all the pollution. So everyone has these little electric bikes. They're actually a little bit scary because they're absolutely silent. You'll just be walking along and all of a sudden, whoosh, one of these will zoom past you. That's a little bit scary. Now, something else you'll notice is that in China, the crowds are usually so big that people don't mind bumping you, or someone actually grabbed me in order to get my attention at some point, which was a little scary. But still, this might get you thinking that Chinese people are rude, but that's actually not the case. People in China are some of the most open, nicest, friendliest people that I've ever met. They were always very polite, very friendly to us and me while we were traveling. I was happy that I was able to go there and see that. Here's a picture of some of the locals we hung out with while we watched the demolition of a building. There was actually this big crane with this chopping arm on the end that was just hacking down the building. They actually came out just to watch that, just on a Saturday night, just, hey, what else to do? And we decided to, hey, let's watch it with them. It's definitely one of the more memorable Saturday nights I've ever had. After that, we moved on to Xi'an. Now, Xi'an, like I said, was the ancient capital of China. Here you can see me with one of Xi'an's most iconic sites, the Terracotta Warriors. That's another very famous name. Now, you can see all of these, they're all little statues in all these trenches. It's actually a whole army of statues. They're literally these giant life-size statues that are built to look like a real army. It's pretty amazing. They were built as part of the tomb of Emperor Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of China. Now, they're just a small part of his tomb, but they are definitely very impressive. You can see them all the way stretched out behind me. Together with the hanger, they make a pretty striking picture. Here you can see a detailed picture of some of the individual warriors, and the details are the most impressive part. Now, each one of them has an individually molded face that's different from every other one in the entire army. They're all unique. And at one point, all of them carried weapons and were painted to be completely ready for battle. It's clear to me that the Terracotta Army was pretty impressive in its day. What I think is really crazy, though, is that the Terracotta Army, as impressive as it is just one part of a huge complex which how big it is just mind-boggling. Now, this was all built, like I said, for Qin Shi Huangdi, China's first emperor. What I think is really crazy, though, is that the Terracotta Warriors are just a tiny part of that. They're essentially just the doormen, guards. About a mile away from all the buzz at the Terracotta Warriors, though, is this huge earthen mound. You can see it just a little bit of it behind me between the trees. This is me with the burial mound of China's first emperor. Now, it's theoretically all underground, the actual burial chambers. And you can just see what looks like this giant man-made hill nowadays. The thing is, it was sealed when it was constructed, and not a living soul has been inside there since. No one knows what the heck is in there. The stories in history tell of a huge burial chamber with floors cut by rivers of flowing mercury and ceilings studded with pearls to resemble the night sky. Understandably, I'm a little bit angry they never excavated it. Whether the stories are true or not, we may never know. Now, Chinese cities are unbelievably busy at night. Everyone comes out. Every open space is filled with people. Everyone's outside, whether they're doing Tai Chi, exercising, or just playing cards. We found this particular group while we were walking back to our hotel. Hundreds of people, all doing choreographed dancing. In China, the night always buzzes with activity. This is actually something very funny we found while we were just wandering through the airport. I don't know if you can see there, but it actually says sleep box. That's literally what it is. It's a giant wooden box that you can pay to sleep in. Now, I thought this was just hilarious. There were probably around 5 of these set up against a wall in the middle of the airport with a little counter out front where you could pay to catch a few hours of sleep before your flight. I mean, I thought it was really funny. We just found it while we were wandering. But it's actually not such a bad idea. I'm sure that in a few years, they'll be all over American airports. After that, we moved on to Lhasa. Now, Lhasa is the capital of the wonderful and mysterious land of Tibet. Now, Tibet is just an amazing, unbelievable country. Tibet, it's one of its most iconic monuments, the Potala Palace. Now, this was actually the home of the Dalai Lama for centuries until he was forced into exile by the Chinese. Now, Tibet is the most deeply spiritual nation that I've ever seen. Tibet and religion are just inseparable. It's also the most isolated place ever. For its entire history, only a few Westerners were able to get in there, and they still limit who goes in today. I was very happy that we were able to get in there, and for all the amazing experiences that we had there. And I talked in a lot more detail about that trip during my Tibet presentation. Here we are back at our nice little map. So we've gone through the entire north of China, and now we're going to just do a quick overview of the south of China. Now, the 4 cities that we visited in the south are Chengdu, Guilin, Suzhou, and Shanghai. Each of them had something unique that we wanted to see. Now, Chengdu is interesting, I think, because there was just one thing that I wanted to see there. There was just one thing that I thought was amazing enough that it was worth going there to see. And I'll show you that to you guys in a second. Down here, Guilin is actually considered to be the most beautiful city in China, and by some people to be the most beautiful city in the entire world. Suzhou, up here, is a Chinese water town, crisscrossed by all these different canals. We had to use boats to get around everywhere. It's pretty cool. But Suzhou is just a small suburb of Shanghai, the last stop on our journey. Shanghai is quite possibly the most advanced city in the entire world, and definitely the most advanced city I've ever seen. I think that that's the future of China. This is awesome. In order to get here, we actually had to hitch a ride on a Chinese ferry, which is why I'm wearing the orange life vest. I just wore the sunglasses to look cool. Now, the reason that I wanted to go to Chengdu was to go to Leishan. And the reason I wanted to go to Leishan was to see this. This is what I thought was amazing enough to come visit this city. The Leishan Giant Buddha. Now, it's just this giant statue that's carved right into the side of the cliff here. What's important about it is that it's actually the largest statue in pre-modern world history. That means that before the age of cranes, this towered above everything else that had been carved on the entire planet. It really is crazy. Now, to give you some scale, those tiny little flecks of color that are on the side of the cliff are actually individual people that are hiking down the vertical staircase next to the statue that we're going to go down later. It really is very impressive. We didn't stop there, though. We went closer. After around an hour of hiking through the jungle, which we had become proficient at by now, we got to the head of the statue. Here, you can see all the fantastic detail that went into it. And you can also see all of the plants that have overgrown it over the centuries. I really like this picture. This gives you an idea of just how big the statue is. Here you can see me with its giant foot planted down onto the ground here, with its giant sandal on. The sandal by itself is bigger than I am. It really is just unbelievable. Now, before we went to China, I was not a big proponent of Chinese food. I couldn't stand the stuff. But while we were there weren't exactly a whole lot of other options, so I ended up eating a bunch of it. Now, that experience completely changed my opinion, especially of Chinese chicken. I love Chinese chicken. Rice, too, is more of a staple here than bread. Here, you could literally see me with a bucket full of it that we got for about a quarter. Something else that I got a lot of practice with while we were in China was actually the art of eating Chinese food. While we were there, I got very skilled at it. Since we've gotten back, I've been looking for a fly to catch. Now, while we were walking through the markets, see if you flash back to anything on this. While we were walking through the markets, we found a box of snails. That's what those are. They're little individual snails. But the one thing that the Chinese didn't anticipate about the snails was that they would try to escape. I don't know if you can see, but those guys are going over the side there. They're going for freedom. After that, we moved on to the city of Guilin. Now, Guilin, like I said, is considered to be the most beautiful city in China. And by some, the most beautiful city in the world. Now, Richard Nixon actually came here while he was visiting China, and he wrote that it was the most beautiful city he had ever seen in the entire world. I don't know if I'd go that far, but there is some pretty cool scenery. Now, here's me with one of Guilin's most famous features, karst hills. Now, karst are these weathered limestone formations, that's technically what they're called, that are, they look like little mini mountains that are just have like vertical sides and they're everywhere. You can see a bunch of them spread out behind me. They make the landscape around Guilin look very surreal, like the landscape of another planet. Here I am floating down the river on a bamboo raft. Now, I really like seeing the karst here right up next to the river, and I especially like how they're kind of reflected in the water. Whoa! This is what it looks like after your bamboo raft goes over a waterfall. All right, now even with all this talk about Chinese history, China is definitely modernizing. 20 years ago, China threw open the doors to Western investment, and since then there's been Western businesses, shops, and restaurants popping up everywhere. Here, KFC. KFC is one of the most common restaurants in China. It literally seems like there's one on every street corner. It's ridiculous. Colonel Sanders has more pictures up in that country than Chairman Mao. I never knew how much the Chinese loved fried chicken. It's another thing that you can read in a book, but seeing it in real life is definitely something else entirely. This is what happens when you try to take a picture out of a bus window. How many people can you fit on a motorcycle? The world may never know. I thought it couldn't get any weirder. Right up until I saw the motorcyclist carrying the giant stuffed animal pig off the back of the motorcycle. Oh, I can't make this stuff up, folks. After that, we went on to Suzhou. And now Suzhou is the second to last city we're going to talk about today, and the second to last city in China. Well, not in China, but that we visited. Now, like I said, there's canals everywhere in Suzhou, and you use boats to get around. Here's me on a barge that we hitched a ride on in order to go down the Grand Canal, the central canal of Suzhou. Now, Marco Polo actually came to Suzhou during his travels to China, and he visited here and lived pretty close to here for a few years. He loved Suzhou, and because of its canals, he called it the Oriental Venice. Now, I have personally been to Venice, which I came to share with you guys last time, and I can say that he was just about spot on. It's the closest thing you see to Venice outside of, well, Venice. One of the big differences between Venice and Suzhou, though, is that in Venice, the Grand Canal just goes through the city. But in Suzhou, the Grand Canal goes through the city and then on across all China. It actually spans the entire distance, north to south, from Beijing to Shanghai. It really is just crazy. It's by far the longest man-made waterway ever made by man. It's really impressive, impressive human achievement, and another testament to great Chinese engineering. That was why I wanted to come to Suzhou. Once you get outside the city, though, it starts looking just a little bit more like Venice. I really like seeing how all the buildings are right up next to the canal here. It doesn't look exactly the same, but I think that if all these buildings were bright pinks and blues and yellows, it'd definitely be closer. I really liked seeing this. It's definitely not something you expect to see in the middle of China. Now, I told you that I love pagodas, and I don't think I could help but making another European parallel here either. This is the pagoda of Suzhou, but you may notice that it has a slight tilt at the top. This is the Leaning Pagoda of Suzhou, which of course can't help but bear comparison to the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Unfortunately, you can't climb it because the huge tilt might make it fall over, but it definitely was a cool final thing to see in Suzhou. That night we were in Shanghai, the last city that we visited. Now, Shanghai is just a really very impressive city. Shanghai, by the time we got to Shanghai, we only had a few hours left in China. The next day, we were going to leave and fly back to America. So we wanted to pack in everything that we possibly could while we were there. I wanted to see everything, all of China that we possibly could before we had to leave. So we were just about running down the streets at some points. Now, Shanghai is awesome. I don't know how else to describe it. It really is just, like I said, maybe the most advanced city on Earth. Here you can see us on a very busy street in Shanghai, this giant pedestrian-only street with all these very bright billboards and just dazzlingly bright. It actually kind of reminds me of Times Square in New York. It just goes to show that China is the true land of diversity. You can see everything there. Now, Shanghai is also the enclave of Western businesses. There's some cheaper, familiar stuff like McDonald's and Pizza Hut, and, of course, KFC. But there's also some higher-end stuff. Omega, Cartier, and Rolex. We managed to get all three of these in the same picture, which I thought was pretty funny. That's something you don't expect to see in the middle of China. Here is me now with the futuristic modern skyline of Shanghai, the Pudong. Now, I always have a hard time saying that, the Pudong. It looks very cool. It's the most futuristic collection of buildings I've ever seen, for sure. Over there, that thin, pointy-looking one is the Oriental Pearl, my personal favorite. It has a really cool design with the orbs and stuff, and it looks pretty futuristic to me. Over here, this building, the Aurora Building, is a building that they actually play pictures and advertisements on the side of the building. The whole side of the building is like a giant movie screen. And up there, that dark tower that's really hard to see, it looks pretty sinister and kind of looks like it disappears into the clouds, is the Shanghai Tower. Now, when it's done, it's going to be the tallest building in all China. Oh, I suppose this picture might take a little explaining. Now, here's a picture of me with the group of Chinese women that mobbed me in order to take pictures. Now, in Shanghai, I thought I was safe. It's a modern, cosmopolitan city. I was wrong. I probably got stopped more for pictures in Shanghai than any other city in mainland China. It was crazy. It was just constant. People are coming from all over. By the end, I was just beckoning people off the benches because I knew they were all waiting for their opportunity. It was really crazy. These people, I think there were 7 of them actually, they just came out of nowhere. They came out of nowhere, swarmed me, took all their pictures, and then disappeared before I had any idea what the heck was going on. It was just crazy. Of course, they didn't just want their group picture. They all wanted their own individual pictures with me, too. So they ended up all trading off their cameras and taking turns posing for pictures with me from all the angles that they possibly could. Now, this went on for a long time. A long time. We had to, like, get away from them quickly, or we would have been there all night. All right, now the next morning was our last in China. We only had a few hours left before we had to leave to go back to Chicago. And like I said, we wanted to see as much of China as we possibly could before we had to leave. So we were just racing to just check off a few more things before we left. We started here at the Shanghai Urban Planning Museum. Behind me, you can see this huge scale model of the city of Shanghai, which really gives you an idea of how big it is. It's a giant city. Shanghai has a metropolitan population of almost 30 million people. Yeah, it's just very crazy to think about. What I think is really interesting to think about, though, is that until 1990, Shanghai was a backwater. It was just a little tiny coastal city that was nothing really notable was about it except a whole bunch of gangsters and crime. But 20 years ago, the Chinese government declared Shanghai a special economic zone, which meant that foreign investors could come in there and invest in whatever they wanted. And since then, Shanghai has just whoosh, taken off. It's been in that 20 years that all the crazy modern stuff I've been showing you has been built. I think it's pretty cool that a city could completely turn itself around like that in 20 years and become at the forefront of like the whole world. Here's me with the Chinese version of Gumby. His name is Haibao, and he was the mascot for the 2010 World Expo. Still, I think that he and Gumby have a little family resemblance. He's not knocking me on the head, if you were wondering. I got stopped for pictures one more time along the river in front of the Pudong. Oh, it never stops. Now, here's one of the last things we saw in Shanghai. Here's me on Shanghai's most famous street, the Bund. Now, the Bund was the old financial center of Shanghai. It's actually right across the river from the new financial center, the Pudong, with all those futuristic buildings I showed you. This, though, was where the money was in the colonial times. All the Chinese banks still want to be located on this street, though, which actually makes it essentially the Chinese version of Wall Street. I thought that was pretty cool, and it's definitely a nice final thing to see in China. Here we are at last in downtown Shanghai, the last stop on our journey. When we got up this morning, we had only a few hours, and by the time we got here, we had only minutes. We had cut it absolutely down to the wire and used all of our time, and we needed to race to the airport in order to make our flight. But there was still one thing that we hadn't seen in Shanghai: the Oriental Pearl, that super futuristic looking awesome tower that I showed you last night. But we were out of time. My dad actually turned back in order to meet our guide so that we could leave. I ended up running completely by myself down the streets of Shanghai, sprinting at full speed past businessmen and pedestrians and police officers, trying desperately to make it there before we had to leave. And I made it. I made it. I ran there and basically collapsed on the ground in front of this building, but I was proud. I had gotten this picture. It was cloudy that day, and I must admit that I'm not the best photographer, so it didn't come out great. But I'm still very proud of myself for being able to make it here. This is the most futuristic, awe-inspiring skyscraper I've ever seen by far. I mean, it just looks super advanced. The design is just really awesome. I really liked being able to be here and see this. Now, I think it's appropriate, with all this talk about China's past, that we end with talking about China's future. This is China's future, and China is always worth it. And then, not just yet, folks, and then, don't get jumpy on me, and then we had to sadly say goodbye to China, and our adventures came to a close. We had a lot of amazing adventures there that I'll never forget. I learned a lot of great lessons, and I hope that through this, I've been able to share at least some of those lessons with you. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you all for coming once again to one of my worldly talks. I hope to be back here to talk to you again sometime in the future. And now feel free to leave, but I am definitely here to answer questions. All right, in the back.
I just want to say thank you for being an ambassador from the United States. You were wonderful.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being an ambassador from Beacon Hill at this talk.
Could you tell me more about that building, the Pearl?
Oh, the Oriental Pearl?
Is it a hotel?
What she asked about the Oriental Pearl, that building I showed you at the end. So officially the story is that it's a multi-purpose skyscraper. So each of the different floors does something different. They have like hotel and restaurant and office space and viewpoints and everything.
Is there snow in those cities? Snow?
Snow? Down south, there's not really as much. Like when we were in the city of Guilin, that's down by Vietnam practically. So there's not really any snow down there. But yeah, in the north, there's snow on the Great Wall in winter. But we just went a few weeks ago during summer.
What about the money?
Oh, money? Do you mean, do I owe you something? Is there? I don't think I have anything in my pockets right now. No, I'm just kidding. What were you asking?
The coins or whatever they traded. I mean, I usually get confused when you have a franc and
Oh, yes. Okay, so she's asking about the currency in China. Now, for currency, they use yuan, CNY, Chinese yuan. So it's about like there's 6 yuan in $1. But it gets confusing because for like 1 yuan you could buy like a truckload of rice. So the quantities of stuff aren't really the same. Yes, sir.
Did you get a chance to ride the bullet train in Shanghai?
I did not actually, the maglev. Yeah, that we drove past it. We drove all the way from Shanghai to Suzhou, which was not fun. It was like multiple hours. Multiple hours. Yeah, which was made worse when, upon getting to Suzhou, we learned that they had a maglev train that got there in like 15 minutes. So that was definitely very interesting.
What about the education system?
The education system.
See any of the schools or colleges or?
We did actually, yeah, we saw a few colleges. They're modern, so they have compulsory education, and they have a bunch of universities there. We saw a few of them. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Do I want to go back to China? Absolutely. China was amazing. I want to go back there 100 times. I'd go and live there, except that I had to go to school. They would definitely probably wonder where I was. And then I would be sending pictures from China. They'd be very confused. Yes?
On that giant Buddha, when was the approximate age, when it was started?
Oh, yeah, good question. So they built that in around 700 AD, so like 1,300 years ago. It's pretty cool because it's like so old, and it wasn't surpassed until the modern times, really. So for 1,000 years, it held the record, which I think is pretty impressive.
What do you think of the plum
Oh.
Forbidden City?
Oh, all right. So here, we'll take your question first. What were you asking?
Why do they call it Forbidden City?
Actually, quickly, I mentioned the Forbidden City, why they called it the Forbidden City. So it's a huge complex of buildings, like a miniature city, that's for use by the emperors. And at one point in history, entry was forbidden to common people. So hence Forbidden City. Because it's like a city that's forbidden. So people are like, oh, hey, that seems like a forbidden city. Then that caught on.
What do you think of the plumbing?
Oh, the plumbing. There were some curious bathroom situations at some points while we were there. But all in all, I mean, it's okay. It worked for them, and it worked for us while we were there. We wanted, so yeah, most places it was generally fair. I didn't ever try drinking the tap water, though. I was a little scared about that. When I got home, actually, because whenever you're traveling around the world, a lot of you have probably been places where you can't use the tap water. And wherever I've been around the world, you can never use the tap water. So when I get home, I'm actually, when I try to brush my teeth, I always have the habit of like trying to get water out of a bottle to brush my teeth with before I realize that, oh, hey, I could use the sink water here. Yeah, so the first thing I do when I get back, I just go to the sink and just run it for a little while, brush my teeth, drink a glass of water. It feels very nice. Okay, questions?
Under healthcare, is it government sponsored?
Oh, 1 second. I'll talk to you in a second. Yes?
Under healthcare, is it government sponsored, like a universal care for the people?
You know, I'm not really, I'm not an expert on the Chinese healthcare, but I'm pretty sure that it's not. I don't think they have a national system for everybody. I mean, they have a lot of people. It'd be a lot of people to cover. Yeah, yes, Yoda, question? Right?
Oh, I asked, did you take classes in how to speak Chinese before you went?
Oh, she asked if I took classes on how to speak Chinese. I consider myself being able to speak Chinese because I speak 2 words of Chinese. Ni hao, xie xie. Hello, thank you. That usually gets you by, so I figure I'm almost fluent. Okay, once more, thank you. And feel free to leave if you want, but don't think I'm keeping you here. But again, I'm here for questions, so if any of you want to ask anything. Hello there. Well, I don't know. I'm used to here, but I don't know. China's pretty awesome. There's definitely some advantages over there. Yeah, I'd say, yeah. Oh, I suppose I haven't turned this off yet.
That was fascinating.
Thank you.
Wish we could have met your father too.
Oh, he's right back there.
Okay.
He came. You could go over and talk to him.
Do you have brothers or sisters?
No, I'm actually an only child.
Okay.
It's very nice. You guys should all try it. All right, thank you once again. I should probably turn this off. Turn this machine off. Mark did it the first time.
You're such an excellent speaker. Did you ever take a speech?
Nope, not really. I actually, lots of practice, I'll say that.